Hello, I'm Dr. Peter Lynn. We're going to talk today about fatigue and many different causes of fatigue. There are so many causes of fatigue and so many people that have the problem that we're going to kind of dissect this out and look to see what's causing maybe your problem and see what you can do about it to look further into getting this problem corrected. So fatigue, what is fatigue? It's being tired all the time. People wake up tired, they don't sleep well at night, or they want to have a nap after breakfast or an afternoon nap for an hour or two. They're losing their life, and so it's a really important problem that we really need to understand. So let's take a look at a few aspects of fatigue. I've drawn a brain to talk to you kind of about the higher up levels of the problem. So fatigue comes in many different flavors, and if you were to think of one or two causes, let's look at one thing called anemia. Anemia is a lack of oxygen carried by the blood. So if you have the blood system right here, you have inside the blood, you have red blood cells that carry hemoglobin, which attach to iron and carry oxygen. So in other words, oxygen is carried and circulates in the blood all through the rest of the body, and it takes oxygen to every tissue of your body. You need oxygen to burn with glucose or sugar to make energy. Every parts of the cell need both oxygen and sugar or glucose. But if there's a lack of red blood cells or hemoglobin that carry oxygen, you've got the first strike against you. So if you have anemia, you can get a blood test. You can look at your red blood cells. You can look at hemoglobin. You can look at hematocrit. You can look at the iron stores, such as ferritin is a very good marker to test for your iron stores of anemia. Ferritin. So next time you have a physical, make sure you get an iron marker called ferritin. You can also get the other iron markers. Fe is the symbol for iron, but you can get total concentration of iron. But make sure you look at ferritin. This is the storage form of oxygen. Anemia is found in the red blood cells, hemoglobin, and hematocrit. So these four main markers will help determine if you have anemia. Ferritin, red blood cells, hemoglobin, and hematocrit. And that's anemia. Second, another cause of anemia has to do with the thyroid gland. So let's look at the thyroid gland. It's a butterfly-shaped gland in your throat, midline, and it's down a little bit lower. And the thyroid is a very important gland that runs metabolism. It makes energy happen. It creates proteins that make energy in every cell of your body, including your brain. So every cell in your body needs thyroid hormones. Well, how does this work, and how are you low, and what can you do about it? You've got a part in your brain, you've got a little area right here called this is your hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus receives input from the whole body. Every part of the body sends its input up to the hypothalamus. It takes in blood sugars, it regulates temperature, it takes hormone input, and one of the hormones, two of the hormones that's related to the thyroid that it feeds back up in the hypothalamus is T3 and T4. These are specifically named from the thyroid gland. They travel up from the body and they go into the hypothalamus And the hypothalamus determines if you've got a high supply or a good supply or a low suppressed supply. If it's low, if the input to the hypothalamus from the thyroid is low, what will happen then is the hypothalamus will send a hormone to the pituitary gland that drops down in front of the hypothalamus. This is your pituitary gland. The hormone that is sent from the hypothalamus to the pituitary is called thyroid releasing factor. This tells the pituitary to tell the rest of the body what to do. Specifically, it will send a marker, another hormone, to the thyroid called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. That tells the thyroid to make more hormones. The hormones that are made from the thyroid are T3 or thyroid 3 or thyroid 4. Inside the thyroid, you have the body takes in iodine and a number of other thyroglobulins that put these hormones together, and then they're secreted again by the thyroid. So TSH, let's recap a bit. Hypothalamus sends a hormone to the pituitary called thyroid releasing factor. The pituitary sends another hormone, TSH, to the thyroid, and the thyroid makes hormones called T3 and T4. If you're tired or fatigued, one of the markers you should have on a blood chemistry is TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, total T3, and total T4. These hormones must be measured and marked on a blood chemistry. If your thyroid output is low, if this is low, if these are low, T3 and T4, this will probably be high TSH, because the pituitary's telling the thyroid to kick out more hormones. And if the thyroid is being affected or influenced by something else, it cannot do that. So the higher the TSH marker, the lower, typically, most commonly, is the thyroid output. So make sure you get that checked. Again, these circulate in the whole body, mostly in the cell, and it's the active, T3 is the hormone that is active. It actually gives you output. T4 is not very active in the cell in the body and telling each cell to make more proteins to make more energy. So T3 is active and it needs to get into the cell. Once it gets into the cell, then you have right here is the chromosome. This gets right in there and it produces, long story short, you make more proteins or energy. So that has to happen. If your energy is low, if you're fatigued, make sure you check your thyroid hormones and at least get those 3 markers. But the most common cause of low thyroid output isn't even a thyroid problem. It's a gut problem. So let's look at this. We'll keep the thyroid there. But let's talk about the next problem. The next problem related to fatigue is gastrointestinal, and I'll show you how this works. So we've got the stomach and the intestinal tract. We'll put them together. Here's a relation between gut problems and you've heard of autoimmune disease, gluten sensitivities. I'm going to tie a lot of things together now. So the most common cause of thyroid problems is called a Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's an immune attack from the immune system to the thyroid. And here's how it works. You eat a piece of gluten. That gluten goes in your mouth and down through the gut. Now, over time, and this has been studied for years and years, actually hundreds and hundreds of years, but it's becoming more prevalent today because of our food processing, our agricultural processing and food manufacturing, things like that, and grain and genetically modified foods and seeds. But long story short, a gluten is a foreign protein. It's different than it's what's been found in nature. So what the body does is perceives as a foreign intruder, and it begins to have problems with digestion. So the gluten molecule gets down here, and it's larger than can be normally processed. And it'll traverse into the small intestine, where the villi, or the lining of the intestine, is supposed to bring it into the bloodstream. So we've got the bloodstream here, and that's where the molecules, we'll make this blue. So the molecules, if it's healthy lining, the molecules will be absorbed right into the bloodstream and no problem. But what will happen if it's a gluten or a foreign, even a microbe or another foreign agent, the body will sense this and become inflamed. The intestinal lining will become inflamed and irritated. And this is a long process. You may not notice it until it becomes too apparent too late. But what will happen over time is this lining will be sloughed off, and then you get circles, you get holes, which we call now leaky gut, that will be poked through the lining of the small intestine, and now larger food particles will enter into the bloodstream. We call that, again, leaky gut. Now, how does this relate to thyroid and being fatigued? Well, over time, the magnificent part of the body's biochemistry and physiology is it will manufacture in the lining here, we call Peyer's patches, antibodies that go, and these will attack foreign molecules. And so over time, if you keep eating the wrong foods, get exposed to the wrong germs or microbes, the body will produce antibodies which will attack and take care of this foreign protein. But in doing so, time after time, the body produces more antibodies in attempts to rid the problem. Interestingly, the thyroid gland right here is very similar shape to the gluten molecule. So what's going to happen is over time these antibodies come up here and begin to chew away and destroy the thyroid gland. So what will happen to your thyroid hormones? The markers? We're going to have less. We're going to have T3 and T4 maybe low, T4 low, and T3 low. And so what will happen to the TSH? We're going to have more TSH coming from the pituitary because more and more of the antibody destruction is taking place in the thyroid gland. But it's not a primary thyroid problem, it's a secondary thyroid problem, primarily from the immune system or autoimmunity. Autoimmunity to the thyroid is called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and it's the #1 cause of thyroid problems in America, hypothyroid, low-functioning thyroid. So in addition to the laboratory tests, T3, T4, and TSH, you're going to need TPO antibodies and TBG antibodies. You've got to get these tests to determine if you've got an autoimmune problem to the thyroid gland. Very important. So it's what you eat over and over and over again that will continue creating these antibodies in response to these foreign proteins, but then that will destroy different tissues and glands and organs. So there's all kinds of autoimmune disease. There's skin type psoriasis, there's nerve system, multiple sclerosis, even diabetes is an autoimmune process. So you think about the body's making antibodies that destroy itself. It's called autoimmunity. Autoimmune. And it's most directly related to diet. Diet. So thyroid problems are another cause of fatigue. And I made a mess of this board, but hopefully you can see how it all networks together. Another problem okay, and let's put the face on here. We talked about the gut. So let's go down to the liver, and let's put another organ in here. There we go. I'm running out of room. So we had the thyroid gland. We talked about the stomach, and we talked about the pituitary and the hypothalamus. But another cause of fatigue is related to blood sugar. This blood sugar problems, hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, or most commonly hyperglycemia, insulin resistance, and then diabetes, is causing mass destruction with people's health across the United States and even the world. We've got type 1 diabetes, and then we've got type 2 diabetes, and now we're even proposing a type 3 diabetes. It is so rampant. Well, let's see how diabetes works, or insulin resistance works, hypoglycemia. It's all related to blood sugar imbalances or dysglycemia. So we take a piece of food. We take a piece of food, carbohydrates, and all carbohydrates are the same. They cause a sugar reaction, whether it's a piece of bread, whether it's a piece of fruit, or sugar, or the candy, or the sodas. The second or two that these carbohydrates enter the mouth, your pancreas releases insulin into the bloodstream. Right here, let's stop here. Which again, it goes right away up into the lining, where closely associated where the carbohydrate is entering. Carbohydrate is broken down instantly in your mouth by certain hormones or enzymes one of them is called salivary amylase. When that's broken down, it's instantly turned into sugar, instantly. What the body can't handle is high amount of sugar. So that's where we get the first phase of insulin response. Immediately, the pancreas has a small amount of insulin stored, and it will send insulin into the bloodstream to take care of that sugar. So when sugar goes up in the blood, you get an insulin response. And that's normal. It happens to everybody except type 1, people who don't have, or a malfunctioned insulin response. They don't have it. They need to have injectable, or they need a pump, or they need some kind of insulin to help take care of the sugar that they're eating. Now, if you have diabetes or if you have blood sugar problem, it's not an excuse to eat bad. You still have to eat good. You have to watch the carbohydrate intake. You don't want this first response to go way too high. You want it just to go up a little bit, not too high. So the first foods come into the mouth, into the gastrointestinal system, and you get a first insulin response. If it's not a lot of sugar, the body can handle it okay, can deal with it. But if it's too much sugar, like Americans tend to eat and consume and drink, this spike of insulin goes way high. It goes way high, and it runs out of the first storage of insulin from the pancreas. So then what the pancreas has to do is manufacture more. The beta cells in this pancreas have to make more insulin. So they're working hard to send more insulin because we're eating more and more carbohydrates. Or we're drinking the colas, or we're drinking things that have way too much sugar in them. So after the first spike goes up, then what will happen is the body has to regroup again. It has to produce more insulin from the beta cells. So then over time, then we get a second spike, and it'll last a little bit longer. And if the sugar intake is not so great, again, the body can handle it. But if it's more than it can handle, your blood sugar is going to go higher than your insulin. So what happens to the excess sugar? Well, you won't have blood sugar problems show up in your blood chemistry until 80% of the pancreas beta cells are destroyed. You have to have 80% of this gone before you're going to show up high blood sugars in the blood. So don't wait till you get to that point. But what will happen to this high sugar is, first of all, the insulin, well, let's go back to the insulin. What the insulin will do, it's really a great idea. The insulin will take, let's go over here. The insulin will take, this is a cell in your body. It will take insulin and sugar, and it will drop it into a muscle cell. This is a muscle cell. And it will feed the muscle cell. It'll feed the cell, and that's good news. That's a good thing to happen. So insulin brings sugar into the cell for energy again. We talked about earlier. But over time, if there's too much sugar and not enough insulin, you're not going to get that to happen. You're going to get more sugar. So what the body will do is take sugar and drop it into the liver. To store it. It stores it in a form called glycogen. That's a storage of sugar. It's a great tool. It's a great thing to do. When that's but if you have continual override of sugar, and the liver gets full, what'll happen is the liver can't store anymore. It's not supposed to store that much. And so what it'll do is, right around the midsection, right around the gut, it'll store it as fat or triglycerides. So every time you see either yourself or other people that have a large abdomen, you know that's a storage form of fat. They've eaten a lot of sugar, or food that's been turned into sugar, can't be processed in the muscles any longer, can't be stored in the liver any longer, and it's deposited as fat. Now, this can be a good thing in a way, but over time it's very destructive. What I mean by a good thing is, over time, that you can metabolize your own fat. In the wintertime, people tend to be heavier in the colder climates. And that's because they've eaten a lot. Look at bears. Look at the animals that hibernate. They build up fat storages so their body can metabolize that. People don't hibernate, but they do in a sense in the wintertime. They are less active. Maybe in the old days they didn't have a lot of food as they do today. So they can metabolize their food or use it for energy. That's a good thing. But what we've done, we've gone way over the top, And we don't do that. People get fatter and fatter. They keep eating more and more and storing more and more as fat. So next blood chemistry test you have, make sure you look at your triglycerides. Your cholesterol to triglycerides ratio should be 2 to 1. You should have twice as many cholesterol, total cholesterol, as you do triglycerides. If your triglycerides are creeping way up higher than they should be, you're headed for blood sugar problems. That's very apparent on the blood chemistry test. The other thing is we talked about type 1 is an inability for the pancreas not to work. The pancreas can't make or makes very inadequate amount of insulin. But type 2 means, and type 2, people born before 1994, there was 5% that would have developed diabetes. But since 1994, 50% of the people will develop diabetes. 50% will develop diabetes after 1994. And most of it is type 2 diabetes or adult onset. That means even today kids are developing type 2 diabetes. And type 2 means the liver, the pancreas is producing enough insulin, but the liver is storing way too much, and the fat is very apparent. But the muscles, back to the muscles, they're tied up. They're no longer going to accept insulin. So they, what we call, resist insulin. So type 2, before you get to type 2, we call it insulin resistance. That's when the body muscles that are supposed to use insulin, and this is happening for a number of reasons. One is inactivity. If you don't exercise and get the muscles efficient and effective to use insulin, the body's going to resist it because of all this process, high insulin, high sugar. At some point, the body's going to resist it. So we're going to get high insulin and high blood sugar again, but it's not due to making too much insulin. It's because of the resistance of the body to insulin and sugar. And it's the same process. So blood sugar's a major problem of fatigue. You eat a heavy meal, and what happens if you're tired after the meal? That's a good indication that you're resistant. You're tending or trending for insulin resistance. It's a bad thing. Meals shouldn't make any difference on how you feel. Whether before a meal, you should feel satisfied if you eat a meal. You shouldn't feel shaky before a meal. That means you may be hypoglycemic and you need that sugar to bring you back up. Or afterwards, you shouldn't be tired. And if you're either one of those, low blood sugar before a meal, if you feel, or afterwards, tending towards insulin resistance, that's a problem. Your meals should be fairly consistent, have no effect on your energy. They should sustain you through the rest of the day. So that's another very important clue on your fatigue level and what's going on with blood sugar. So there are a number of reasons. There are even more than this. There's electrolyte imbalances that can be tested. If you're not getting electrolytes into the cell, like sodium and potassium in and out of the cell, magnesium and chloride, calcium, those are electrolytes that need to get in and out of the cell. There's also maybe a parasympathetic dominance related. So we've got a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is related to adrenaline, and it helps you in stages of fear or fright or stress. And what will happen is the adrenaline will go out, or epinephrine we call it now, or norepinephrine, and it increases the body functions. It increases your heart rate, it increases your blood pressure, increases your susceptibility to dealing with the stress that takes place immediately. That typically is increased in the morning. You need more adrenaline, you need more epinephrine and adrenaline in the morning. And as the day progresses, to meet the demands of even gravity, but other people, your work, and everything you're dealing with, then in the evening, your sympathetic nerve system should go down. So it goes up in the morning, and then it should come down at night. The parasympathetic starts in the evening, and it goes up. And what the parasympathetic nervous system does, it's a depressant. It slows the heart rate down. It slows the breathing rate down. One quick little test you can do is take your pulse sitting, count it for 15 seconds, and then multiply it by 4, and then lay down. Really, that pulse shouldn't change much, and if it plummets, if it goes down, that's a parasympathetic marker. It's a clue that the parasympathetic system is dominant. Another thing is take and scratch your skin. Just take a fingernail across your skin. If you see a wide red line, that's a sign of parasympathetic dominance. The parasympathetic nerve system may be active too much. And what will happen when this is, remember, this is a suppressive and this is an excitatory state. So those are a couple of different, and most people today tend to be, you would think, sympathetic, but they're not. They're parasympathetic dominant, as we've tested them. Their system is trying to slow them down so hard that it suppresses their system. Depression and mental, emotional problems are also related to the parasympathetic dominant as well as sympathetic. But most people typically are parasympathetic. They're slow down, they're slow to talk, they're slow to move. But ironically, they don't sleep well at night either. Because the body always tries to work in balance. So when one system is suppressive, another type of system might be stimulatory to try to bring balance back to the system. We should be in a nice typical pattern like this. We shouldn't be depressive more in a day and then suppressive more at night. That's contrary to normal homeostasis or action of the body, but most people, they're tired all day and they don't sleep at night. That's completely opposite. Their circadian rhythm patterns are way off. So sympathetic and parasympathetic alterations can significantly influence fatigue, as well as all of them. And most people don't come in with just one problem. They have multiple correlated problems. So I hope you've understood a little bit of how fatigue works and how the body chemistry works and how physiology works, because it's so important, it's critical. You have to have the right functions of the body to get through your day and to enjoy your life. So hopefully you've learned something that you can use in your life today, and we'll be talking later again about more physiology and complications that you can actually change your health and improve your life. I'm Dr. Peter Lind.